Hello, welcome to this tutorial video instructing how to dissect a cochlear lateral wall tissue from a mouse cochlea. Before we get started, let's get acquainted with some important structures we will need to know for the course of this dissection. The specimen that you see here has been freshly dissected from a mouse temporal bone, and this specific specimen is from the left side. I have already cleaned off the connective tissue and some muscles which are attached to the structure, so what you see here is a freshly cleaned specimen that's ready for dissection. The cochlea is shown here, and that's the spiral structure which contains the lateral wall tissue we're interested in extracting. This is the vestibular system, and for the course of this video, for simplicity, I will refer to it as the base. To do this dissection, you will need both of your hands. I'm right-handed, and my right hand is on the right side of the screen here, and my left hand is on the left side of the screen here. I prefer to use a coarse forceps in my left hand, and I have scored the tips for better ability to grasp the structure, and you can use a finer forceps in your right hand for the finer aspects of dissection. So before we get started, let's point out the two structures we see here. And this structure, the hole shown here, is the oval window, and to it is attached the stapes, which is missing in this specimen. This is the round window. In order to get started with the dissection, the first step is to open the cochlea on the apical side. So to do that, we will lean the cochlea up like this, and we need to use a pick with a sharp end, shown here, in order to break a hole in the apical surface of this cochlea. And in order to select the best place to enter, you want to pick a place that the bone is transparent, near the helicotrema. And the reason we want to do that is because the transparent part of the bone is the thinnest and it's easiest to break through, and it assures us that we're not damaging any of the underlying structures by breaking through the bone. So in this specimen, the point we really want to pick is around here. And once you've picked a point, you want to poke the tip of the pick into the bone, and you want to make a drilling motion to get inside. And the drilling motion allows us to evenly apply pressure to the bone so that we do not break a large part of the bone. And once the tip of the pick is in, you can simply flip out the pick to break the bone. You can do this very slowly. And now have broken off the bone overlying the apical turn of the cochlea. To get a closer look inside, let's zoom in. Here you get a pretty good look inside the cochlea from the apical surface. And the bone that's been broken off allows us to see inside the cochlea through a window here. And as you can see, there is a lot of white substance, and that is the organ of Corti, which we will want to remove first. The lateral wall tissue we're interested in can be seen here. The blood vessels that you see here is part of the stria vascularis, which is part of the cochlear lateral wall tissue. In order to get better access at that cochlear lateral wall, we will first need to remove the organ of Corti. And to remove the organ of Corti, we can grab the free end, and as we pull out, try to take it as one whole piece by turning to the contour of the cochlea. Sometimes you can get it out in one big piece. Sometimes you have to go back multiple times. You'll also be removing the medialis when you're doing this. And the reason we really want to take out this organ of Corti is because by the time that we're extracting the cochlear lateral wall tissue from the underlying bone, we want to make sure that all these supporting cells and structures have been removed, so that when we remove the cochlear lateral wall, we do not take anything that's accessory. So you just want to take as much as you can, and you can go back multiple times, but the important thing is to just remove as much as you can from the viewpoint shown here. You will not be able to get everything, and there will be more opportunities to remove more of the organ once we open the cochlea from the basal turn. When you're doing this, it's important to stay in the middle of the opening you have made in the apical turn, because you don't want to accidentally grab and pull out any of the cochlear lateral wall. So it's important to try to stay in the middle as much as possible. And so from the viewpoint here, we can see that we've taken out as much as we can of the organ of Corti from this viewpoint. And the next step is to get after the stria vascularis. And so the point of greatest exposure is right here, and we can see a good part of the stria right above the oval window. And we want to separate this part of the stria from the underlying bone as much as possible. The best way to do this is to take one tine of the forceps and insert it into the plane between the lateral wall tissue and the actual bone. By getting into that plane, you're able to peel off the lateral wall from the underlying bone. As you go around, there will be pieces of bone jutting out, overlying and overhanging the tissue that you're interested in. And you can remove that by simply carefully removing the bone that's overhanging the lateral wall tissue. You want to get as much exposure as possible of your stria vascularis at this time. And you don't want to break off too much of the bone, because that could break off portions of your lateral wall. You just want to break off the little pieces of bone that are overhanging the stria. And here, now you can see we visualize a good amount of our stria, and we can start to remove it from the underlying bone, detach it from the underlying bone. And this part should be done slowly, we do not have to detach the stria or the lateral wall in the whole apical turn, only the portion of the apical turn that overlies the oval window, shown here. So now I've freed up my lateral wall tissue from the bone that overlies the oval window. And this will allow me to break this portion of the bone that's overlies the basal turn and a portion of the apical turn. So you want to stick the tines of your forceps, one end into the hole that you've already opened, and the other end into the space left behind by where the stapes used to be. And you want to grab this portion and just gently rock it back and forth until it starts to give. And then you can break it. And now here you can see that that part of bone has been taken out. The next step is to remove this part of the bone that overlies the basal turn. And you want to do this very carefully, because you don't want to remove the lateral wall tissue that is attached to it. So you can do it piece by piece. So I've taken that little piece there. Here I'm just moving the apical turn tissue out of my way so that I don't accidentally grab it. This is the piece of bone that I wanted to remove. It overlies the basal turn. It's a pretty big part of the bone. It's a pretty big piece of bone, bigger than the pieces of bone that overlie the apical turn. And it's attached to lateral wall tissue shown here, which in this specimen I've been able to leave behind. And that's really what I want. And the next part is to free over this part of bone, which overlies the hook of the lateral wall tissue. The reason I want to take this out is because I want to expose that hook as much as possible so I can remove it in its entirety. The bone here is much thicker than the bone in the apical turn of the cochlea, so when you break it, you have to be very careful to take only a little piece at a time. Here, as you can see, I'm exposing more and more of my hook, and I'm just removing some of the soft tissues and the bone overlying that hook to give me the best exposure possible so that I can pull it out in one piece. This is pretty good exposure, and the next step is to grab the hook. And to do that, I extend my forceps down here, grab the hook, and pull it out. And now I have freed up this end of the cochlear lateral wall tissue. It is no longer anchored to the cochlea. And it is this free end that I will use to start unraveling the cochlear lateral wall. But before we do that, I would just like to remove some of the organ of Corti that's stuck down in here, which I was not able to get through the apical view earlier. Again, the reason I'm removing the organ is because I don't want it to be attached to my lateral wall. And when I remove my lateral wall, I definitely don't want it to come with the organ. Right now, I'm using the advantage of the fact that the cochlear lateral wall is still attached to the cochlea bone, so that when I pull off the organ of Corti, I'm not going to pull off the lateral wall tissue because it's still attached to the bone. Here I'm just removing it piece by piece. And just like earlier, we're not going to be able to take out every piece, but you definitely want to take out as many pieces as you see. So I've taken out as much as I can see from this perspective, and now it's time to unravel my cochlear lateral wall tissue. To do this, I first put the cochlea flat against the surface on which I'm dissecting. Now I will zoom out a little bit to see the whole turn. And before we start unraveling the lateral wall, let's get acquainted first. So this is the hook right here, which I freed down here, which used to be anchored to the cochlea. Now it provides the free end that allows me to unravel. I will start at this end first by finding that plane between my lateral wall tissue and the bone. That's around here. And I will put the tines of my forceps into that plane and start removing the lateral wall tissue little by little, scraping little by little. I will encounter pieces of bone that jut out and overhang my lateral wall tissue along the way, and I will simply remove that until I get better exposure. Here's some more organ that I did not remove previously. And And at this point, it's very important to not push too hard against this cochlea bone, because you will break a hole in the bone and the bone chips will be attached to the lateral wall tissue. Here's some more pieces of organ that I'm just removing. And during this step, it's very important to use your left hand to turn the cochlea. Because of the natural contour of the cochlea and how it's round, you want to be able to maneuver it with your left hand so that your right hand is able to stay in the same plane and scrape off that lateral wall tissue piece by piece with more ease. I'm just making my way around, and as I'm going, I'm turning it with my left hand to get the best angle possible. If it breaks, it's okay. You can always start on this end. So here, I've scraped off the basal turn, definitely, and it's still going to be attached via the apical turn. And to do that, I find the plane between the cochlear lateral wall tissue and the actual bone in the apical turn and do the same thing. I'm still turning with my left hand to give me the best angle possible. And as I come around here, the whole structure now is free. Let's take this tissue and put it in a free space to observe it. There is the cochlear lateral wall tissue. You want to inspect it to make sure that there are no pieces of organ of Corti attached to it, which you will want to remove. Additionally, you want to make sure that there are no bone chips attached to the tissue, and you will want to remove that as well. So far, this looks pretty good, and it's always good to go back to the cochlea and make sure that you did not leave any tissue behind. Here we get a pretty good view into what is left of the cochlea, and as you can see, we've taken out the apical portion of the bone, we've broken the basal turn overlying the oval window, and we've removed portions of the basal turn bone, and now we can look inside to see the whole turn of the cochlea, and we can see the bone, and we can see that there's no tissue attached to this bone. If there is, you want to run your forceps against it to make sure that you got every piece. Sometimes it's very tricky because at the edge here there will be pieces of tissue that are left behind. So make sure you can just scrape it along the edge to make sure no big pieces of stria come off, or spiral ligament. And so that looks pretty good, and we can tilt up the cochlea here and look down and see that we've gotten the entire hook anchored into this part of the cochlea. So we can see that we've gotten almost every piece of tissue, and we can be assured that nothing was left behind. We can go back to our tissue here, and this is the cochlear lateral wall tissue, including the stria vascularis and the spiral ligament that we're interested in extracting. Thank you for watching this video.